Hey gunfighters, it's time for another Q&A here on Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. These questions are coming from two places. Spotify has a thing where I can ask you guys a question, but I flipped that and said, if you guys have a question or something like that, ask me a question. These questions came from Spotify. Also, some may come from the group chat or from the patrons. So if you want to have your questions read, you can take a shot on Spotify and ask me a question. I'll try and get to them if I think I have a decent answer and they're a legit question. Also, if you want to become a patron, you have the opportunity to be part of the group chat. And we literally chat all the time. It's after getting up in the morning, praying and reading my Bible, I'll generally, pretty soon after that, check the group chat. And it's not just me on there. There's a bunch of good, knowledgeable guys on there I'm humbled to be a part of. And we help each other out, talking about all kinds of stuff. But guns, as you might imagine, is a big part of it. If you want to become a patron, there should be a link in the show notes for Patreon. With that, let's get into the first question. Do you know John Lovell? What do you think of his Shadow System Glocks he sells? What would you change about one if you were to carry one? Alright, well, that's kind of a several part question there. Good for sneaking it in, I guess, or good for asking several questions. John Lovell, I don't know him. I know of him. I have a lot of respect for the man and what he does, especially on his faith, and that he does not hide that. I think a lot of people, sadly, in all kinds of areas of culture, hide their faith, and John Lovell does not. And hats off to him for that. Mad props, whatever the kids are saying these days. I got a lot of respect for John Lovell there. He seems to be a very deep man of faith and also a gunfighter. That's hard to find. I applaud him for that. I don't know him personally, right? I've never met him in person. But I have a lot of respect for him. Obviously, his channel is far bigger than mine. He's got a big YouTube presence. I remember listening to him back when he was on somebody else's show way back in the day, the first time I heard of him, and I thought, this guy's pretty cool. So, I think he's pretty cool. What do I think about the Shadow Systems Glocks he sells? Well, I've never handled a Warrior Poet Shadow Systems Glocks. I have handled the regular Shadow Systems Glocks. Now, John Lovell is a Glock guy. I am not a Glock guy. That said, I have conceded before that Glock is a fair, okay weapon. Oh, it even almost hurts to say. No, just kidding. I've carried Glock as a professional. I carried a Glock as a law enforcement officer, LAPD. I did later switch my law enforcement career to the Smith & Wesson M&P. I do prefer it. I prefer a lot of guns over Glock, to be honest. That said, the Shadow Systems, is it better than a regular Glock? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but you're setting the bar pretty low. Is it better than a regular Glock? For sure. The Shadow Systems is better than a regular Glock. And you asked if I was going to carry one, what would I change? Well, here's the tricky part of that. The trigger on those Shadow Systems, it's maybe better than a standard Glock trigger. But when I first got one, I thought, oh, this is going to be cool. It's going to be like a Glock, the reliability, but with the good ergonomics and the good trigger. I think the ergonomics are better. I think the trigger is really maybe better, marginally. I'd have to put them side by side to even see if the trigger is better at all. And that says a lot, because the Glock trigger is atrocious. So, what would I change? The trigger. But you get into this catch-22. If you modify the trigger, a lot of times you come into liability if you actually do get in a shooting. So, the one thing that I would want to change is one of the things you probably shouldn't change for liability reasons. So, there's my thoughts on the Shadow Systems Glock. Again, that being said, a lot of respect for John Lovell, and he's a Glock guy. If you're going to run a Glock, I certainly think the Shadow Systems is better than a regular Glock, hands down. Good question. Oh, and that was from NordsHick45. This next one's from Brian. Can you speak on cold weather storage? Is it okay to keep a gun in -2 degrees Fahrenheit in a car for it's 8 to 16 hours? Or full-time going from 60 degrees Fahrenheit, say 8 degrees Fahrenheit overnight while parked at work. Okay, so yeah, for sure. It's totally fine for the gun. The gun is not the issue. Despite what one of the old timers told me when I was a cop and I actually carried, I forget if I was at that time carrying a Glock or an M&P. He said, don't leave it on the dash, it'll melt. Of course he was joking, he was a big 1911 guy. But it's not going to melt, right? It's not going to melt, it's not going to freeze. There are a couple of caveats. You've heard me say probably many times if you're a regular listener, don't trust your light to things with batteries. Okay, period. This is one big reason why. I don't care how long they say the battery's supposed to last or how well it says it's going to work. If batteries get really hot, they can explode. Have you ever left an electronic device in your car, like a flashlight or something, and gone back months later and checked it and the batteries are all fuzzy and the device no longer works because it's all corroded because the battery acid split open? Same thing can happen with the batteries in your shooting device, right? So if it's something that takes batteries, probably not the place for it. Be cautious of the battery thing. Will the gun work? Absolutely, the gun will work. So make sure you have another way to aim it that's not reliant on batteries. Also, if it gets crazy cold, it can get so cold that the electricity literally will not flow out of the battery. And I'm not an electrician, but I know that's a real thing. So extreme hot and extreme cold can be a thing. Another thing that can be a thing is lubricant. Depending on the lubricant you use, if it gets really cold, it can get rather sluggish. So just make sure that the lubrication that you're using is pretty good for extreme temperatures. A real easy one to recommend is CLP, right? Made for, like I'm talking actual military CLP. It's made for the military. It's tested in a wide range of environments and conditions. So if you're at all concerned that your lubricant is not going to work if it gets really hot or gets really cold, just use CLP. Unless you're a veteran and the smell of it brings back memories, right? Other than that, just use CLP. It's an easy answer. It will work in the hot and the cold. The other thing is, if you're talking blued guns, you might get some rust. If you're talking stainless guns, you're talking nitride, some kind of better finished Cerakote, you're probably okay. But as far as like a gun functioning, I'm not aware of any gun that is so bad that it would cease to function if it got super hot or super cold in the car. Again, the battery thing is a separate issue. But as far as the guns go, yeah, I don't care if you're in Vegas and it gets who knows how hot in the car, or you're in outer Mongolia or North Dakota. Other than the batteries, you should have no problem with the actual gun itself. It's a good question. Next one's from Alaric, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to read the question because it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, sometimes it happens, you're just typing, especially on a phone, and you know what you want to say, but you don't proofread, and I don't really know what you want to say, so I'm going to take a stab at it from what I think you were trying to say. You say you were a young man, and you talk about the 410. So I'm going to try and deduce from that a couple of things I think you may be asking. So the 410, I think it's an awesome round. I think it's good for a lot of things. It's great for small game hunting. I grew up, that was my first gun, a 410, putting meat on the table, doing a ton of hunting with the 410. I think the 410 is one of the most practical guns you could own, as long as it's a decent gun. 410s are great. They're like a break open single shot 410 or a good pump action 410 or any kind of good reliable 410 is one of the most practical firearms for a lot of things. And with the advent of a lot of the more modern defensive loadings made for the handguns but are even better out of an actual shotgun, it's not the worst thing for defense. Something like a pump action 410 is certainly better than a lot of other options. Certainly better than a handgun if you're not concealing it on you. And you asked about being a young man, and you said you were 22. Well, I mean, that's relative. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I had already done 2 combat tours and been an urban warfare instructor when I was 22. And at 22, you should be able to run any firearm on the planet, like including a Dillon minigun. So don't think that you're too young for other guns. Unless you have some kind of physical or mental impairment, which I have no reason to believe that you do, right? As long as you can have no other reason not to, you should be able to run anything. You want to step up to a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge, rock on. You want to try out an AK or an AR-15, I mean 22, again, you should be able to run pretty much any gun on the planet. I mean, even nowadays, it was even younger in days of yore, but even nowadays, most men join the the military at 17, 18, 19 years old, right? So your problem is probably not age. It may be lack of training and lack of familiarity, but those things can be rectified. Anyway, good question. I hope that I answered what I think you were trying to ask. What is the legal age to own a pistol? This is from Isaiah. And this, you'd think this would be easy to answer. Okay, historically, the age at which you can purchase a pistol is 21. In many municipalities, you can own a handgun far younger than that. So 18 or even younger, if it was given to you, lawfully purchased by a parent or by a guardian or by whoever has legal dominion over you until you are of said age to actually purchase one on your own. Historically, you were supposed to be 21 to purchase a handgun, and I think that may have been challenged recently in some locations. But historically, 21 to purchase a handgun. Now, you could own a handgun earlier than that. You could even get a carry permit in some places far before you were 21. I quote again, and I didn't plan this, but going back to the military thing, right? You might join the military and get issued a handgun at 18. But there are many other places where you can legally own a handgun. You just can't go out and buy one because whatever law that is, that don't expect gun laws to make sense, I guess. But you could own one, but generally to purchase one, you have to be 21. Now, I got asked this yesterday by the patrons, and the question was, we're talking about the subject of truck guns came up and PCCs, and somebody asked, would I go 20 gauge shotgun or would I go PCC? For a truck gun, I would certainly go 20 gauge shotgun. It's not my general go-to. My general go-to is a 12 gauge Mossberg 590S. I said, what about accuracy for an active shooter? And I think there's a big misconception out there on shotguns and accuracy. I would still choose a shotgun. Like, we trained hostage shots, LAPD with a shotgun. I have Benelli shotguns that will hit a target the size of a quarter at 50 yards with decent slugs. The size of a quarter at 50 yards. You double that at 100. So what, the size of a silver dollar at 100 yards? And I'm not talking about a rifled barrel. I'm talking about a smoothbore barrel with a good slug with good sights, not just a smoothbore with a bead on it, right? I don't think that many serious shooters would just take out a rifle with random ammo and shoot and not hit where they're aiming and be like, oh, this rifle's not accurate, right? That would be ridiculous. But a lot of shooters will take out a shotgun with whatever slugs they can find at Walmart and expect it to just somehow shoot where the bead on the shotgun is. If you're talking about just a smooth tube with a bead on it, which I think companies love to push for like home defense shotguns because they just assume you're just going to be hoping for the best. Now with a rail with two beads, you can actually get pretty accurate. But again, if you're just going to Walmart and picking up the cheapest slugs and expecting it to just randomly shoot where the bead is on the top of the shotgun, you're probably going to think the shotguns aren't that accurate. But if you actually get a decent set of sights on the shotgun and you actually pattern several different kinds of slugs and sight it in and know where to hold, absolutely I think that shotguns are much more accurate than people think. That said, for an active shooter, if you're talking about you're going to have to stop an active shooter today, do you want, and he didn't specify which PCC or which 20 gauge shotgun, but if I'm just focused on the active shooter, I'm probably going to pick the PCC, right? I'll take an H&K SP5. I'm a big fan of the MP5, but an HK SP5 with a decent optic for an active shooter scenario, that's going to be a better choice. But that's one scenario of why I have a truck gun. If it's an all-around survival gun, end-of-the-world type gun, just I got some free time on a road trip and I want to do some hunting. Whatever the case is, I want to be able to put meat on the table. It's a near ambush. Whatever the case is, I'm still going to pick the shotgun. If you're saying it's just for an active shooter, and if that's all that you care about for a truck gun, then a PCC, I would take a really good PCC over the 20 gauge shotgun. However, if that was the case, I wouldn't choose a PCC either. I would choose a proper rifle. I would choose like an M16 pattern or a full a full powered rifle like a SCAR 17 or a good AR 10 or something. If I'm only worried about active shooters, I'm going to pick that. Anyway, that was a question that came up. I thought you guys might also glean from it. And here is a question for the group chat that I asked them. Like I said, it's not just me helping them, it's them helping me too. We help each other. Iron sharpens iron. And so if you don't know, recently some of my guns got stolen. Sad day, but life goes on. Got a lot to be thankful for. That said, if you want to help support and start a little mini GoFundMe to get some guns back, always just throw a couple of bucks on Venmo. There should be a Venmo link in the show notes if you appreciate the show, helped out at all. Maybe you want to contribute and you don't want to be a patron. There should be a Venmo link in there. Anyway, I asked this question to the chat. I had a really good setup, just how I wanted it. It was a really good Ruger Takedown 22. Kind of my go-to survivaling 22. Would take it out on expeditions and stuff, and it's a good little survival 22. It was the Takedown. I had it with the really good tech sights and all that stuff. Anyway, I don't have it anymore. So I'm looking at replacing it for the Ultimate Survival 22. Do I go again with a Ruger 1022, or do I go with something else and perhaps consider a bolt action? Here is the big issue. With the semi-auto, you get rate of fire. So if it's going to be, like, again, I've said before that if I had to pick one long gun for the end of the world, it would not be a 22. But if it was, if the criteria were different, like if I had to cover a long distance on foot, if I was going to be a refugee, if I had to hoof it with all the ammo I was ever going to be able to carry, then the 22 makes sense. If I'm covering a vast distance. If that scenario actually happened, what would be the best survival 22? Here is the issue. With a semi-auto, probably most commonly the 1022, you get rate of fire. So if I had to use it for defense, I can send out several rounds downrange quickly. However, there are some advantages to a bolt action. With a bolt action, let's just say for argument's sake, it's a little bit simpler and maybe, especially with a good one, more accurate. You get a simplicity and an accuracy advantage there. Also, I can shoot generally a wide variety of ammo, right? Whereas the 1022, if I want semi-auto capability, I'm pretty much limited to 22 long rifle. With the bolt action, I should be able to shoot shorts, longs, and long rifles. Why might I want to do that? Because that's all that I can find, right? We've all lived through ammo shortages before. If you're old enough to own a gun and you're listening, you've lived through a couple of ammo shortages. Sometimes you can't find 22 long rifles. Sometimes for years it's hard to find. But you might be able to find 22 shorts or 22 longs. Also, it gives me the ability to be clandestine, to be quiet. With a bolt action, without the need of a suppressor and all that stuff, I can shoot 22 shorts, I can shoot 22 CB caps, I can shoot 22 Calibris, all of which are very, very quiet out of a proper rifle length 22 rifle, 16 inches or more. Super quiet. Is that flexibility in ammo, the perhaps more accuracy, the ability to be quiet, the flexibility on all the different, being an omnivore on the different 22 rounds that it can eat, is that better? Does that outweigh the fast follow-up shot capability and the capacity of a semi-auto 22? Anyway, that's what I've been pondering lately. God willing, when the 22 gets replaced, I will let you know. And I think that'll about wrap up the questions for this episode. Again, if you want to submit a question, if you listen on Spotify, you can ask me a question on there. I'm not promising that I'm going to read it, but I think it's a good one. Maybe it'll make it on the air. If you want your question answered more directly, more quickly, you can become a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. And again, if you want to throw a couple of bucks, there should be a Venmo link on there. I am humbled and blessed that you listen. It really is humbling to know that so many people listen. I actually use Spreaker. If you don't know, you have to have like a host and pay for like hosting and things to get a podcast out. I don't use Spotify. I use Spreaker. I'm not super happy with Spreaker, haven't been for a while, but Spotify has much better analytics. Just to give you an update on the podcast. Spotify has much better analytics, and when I look, I pretty much have a split as far as sometimes it's one over the other, but they're pretty close. People that listen on Apple Podcasts or through Apple, and people that listen on Spotify. They're by far the two biggest, and then everything else is a distant third, fourth, fifth, whatever. Anyway, on Spotify, I checked not long ago and we had over 100,000 listens. That is very humbling. I checked just last night when I was getting these questions, because that's another cool feature that Spotify has, and 112 as of last night. Right? That's well over a 10% increase in a very short amount of time. That is a huge blessing. Thanks, guys. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks for listening. Thanks for liking and subscribing. Thanks for following the show. Thank you for sharing this with people that you know will like it. Thank you to all the patrons. Right? You wouldn't have this kind of content because I used to do these a couple of times a year on the way back and forth from the range. The quality was not there. The frequency was not there. So just as I thank the patrons, you guys should thank the patrons too. And again, thanks for listening, liking, subscribing, following the show, sharing it, for all that you do. I appreciate you. With that, let's get into the tactical tip and the tactical verse of the day. Michael's, the art supply store. Wait, what? I thought we were talking about guns. Yeah, we are. Michael's, the art supply store. There's all kinds of stuff that you can use there for gunfighting, believe it or not. If you want to make some kind of specific target or something like that, they have all those sheets of varying sizes of very bright, obnoxious colored construction paper. Those make great, or can make great, targets. They have pipe cleaners. Pipe cleaners are great for cleaning stuff. Especially stuff if you're using some kind of nasty, especially in situations where something is so nasty and you have to get so aggressive that you like rip the cotton off the end of the Q-tip. You know, pipe cleaners. They're good, and they're good to get in the little teeny places if you're trying to clean stuff out. Let's say the gas tube, which is basically a pipe. You want to clean that. The gas tube or the gas key on an AR-15. Modeling clay, which if you're trying to bed a rifle, right, modeling clay can come in really handy if you're trying to keep that bedding compound where you want it. Anyway, next time if your wife drags you to Michael's or you got some extra time, don't complain, right? Just walk around, see what you can use in Michael's for gun cleaning stuff. You might be pleasantly surprised. Your tactical verse of the day. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. It reminds me of another verse. The gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. Being chosen by God to be one of His special people, to be rescued when you deserve death, to be brought back to life, to be atoned for by the precious blood of Christ. These are important things. To know that God will never leave you nor forsake you. It's worth more than all the guns in the world. More than all the ammo, more than all the things that rust, destroy, and the shiny Babylonian trinkets. It's worth so much more than that. Let us not forget what's really important. With that, thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.